Amir is here, as always, and I would like to try to smoothly shift the focus of this channel and to share my chess experience. Currently, I'm ranked at about 1500 on chess.com, but I hope to improve, and I decided to name this playlist A Long Road to 2000. I hope to become, at some point, to reach the rating of 2000 on chess.com. We'll see if I'm able to make it. And on this channel, I'm going to be sharing the positions that I encountered in my own chess games, and I'll be sharing with you my approach, how I learn theory, how much theory I learn, and what I do on a daily basis. So without further ado, let's analyze the game that I played on chess.com, and my opponent was an Austrian guy. I played c4. Normally, if I've got white pieces, I usually play c4. I like the fact that it avoids this very nasty Nimzo Indian defense, where if I play early d4, then there's all sorts of unpleasant pins that hinders my development. So that's why my number one choice is to play c4 and then see what happens. My opponent played e5. I know in theory, one can play g3 and fianchetto the light square bishop. One can play knight c3, but at that point I was so frustrated with all the theory, so I decided to give up one tempi. I played d4. My opponent took. I took with the queen. Queen takes on d4, and I gave a free tempi to my opponent. My opponent developed his knight and attacked my queen. So I know there are lines where queen can give some check or move maybe on d3, but I decided to avoid all the complications, and I simply retreated. I put my queen on d1. I realized I sort of gave up the initial advantage that I had. If we see what the engine says, it says that minus 3.7, so meaning that the black at this point already has an advantage, and it's considered that 1/3 of the pawn is for black. And of course, it's so important at this point not to make any dumb moves. Like, for example, this would be an error. If I put a queen on, let's say, d5, then I would automatically give my opponent an opportunity to develop his second piece with a tempi on my queen. So I gave up only one tempi. Then my opponent played knight f6. I played knight c3, all the normal standard developing moves. My opponent played bishop b4, and I know now indeed that's the pin that I was talking about at the very beginning. Now I'm really experiencing this very unpleasant pin, so I decided to take action immediately, and I put my bishop on d2, so that way the pin no longer works. My opponent castled short. I played a3. I wanted to double check the intentions of this dark square bishop. My opponent played bishop to e7. Then I played g3. Well, at the beginning, that's the idea that I had from the very beginning. I wanted to fianchetto my light square bishop. I wanted to put my light square bishop on g2, so my light square bishop would potentially have this diagonal, and I wanted to make my light square bishop a powerful piece. So my opponent played d6. I did fianchetto my light square bishop e6, attacking my pawn, and that's what I was talking about at the very beginning. I played a very intuitive move. I played b3, and it turns out that there is no guarantee that now this pawn on c4 is defended. It looks like everything is okay, but there's actually a line. So this is what you could use in your rated games on chess.com or on some other server. If my opponent knew that line, first of all, the best way to react was simply, instead of putting a pawn on b3, the best way to react was actually to play knight d5. So as I said, the best way to react instead of playing b3 was actually knight d5. And I wanted to show you one of the lines. If my opponent took, a good way to respond would have been simply c takes on d5. And that way white could have had the opportunity to win a piece, because now we can see that there is a fork and that this pawn is defended by the fianchettoed bishop. So that was an absolutely best way to go about defending the pawn. But then again, there could be a line where if my opponent, if black, was a little bit smarter, so this is another continuation. Knight would have gone on e5. Oops, not that knight. After knight d5, black knight from f6 would have gone on e5, and then we would have gotten this continuation. b3 now works, because now we can see that after white plays b3, of course we experience the pressure from the knight, from the dark knight, but at least that light square bishop isn't slicing, meaning that, I mean, of course it x-rays this pawn, but now this way it's so much easier to defend this pawn. But in the game I played b3 right away, and I must say that when trying to improve, it's very important to use longer time control. It was 5 plus 5. So on the one hand, this game was indeed with an increment, but ideally when trying to improve, I think one should really play, well, let's say 10 plus 15 or 15 plus 10. And then here, my opponent actually had an opportunity to win a pawn. So the most precise move was d5 in this position for black. So that's what I want you to focus on. Just visualize this position. This position can actually occur in your real games. Remember not to be afraid to organize some sort of a breakthrough in the center, especially when your king is already safe and sound. Then my opponent could have put his rook, I suppose, on e8, from where that x-ray definitely would have been unpleasant. But the main idea here is not to be afraid to play, well, after the move b3, to play actually d5. Where's that line? Yeah, d5. And let's have a look on how this game may have continued. I would have taken, my opponent probably would have taken, and most likely I would have played some normal developing move, preparing to castle short. Then knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, and then we go straight into an endgame. He takes, I take, and then my opponent would have gotten an opportunity to get a free pawn. And it looks like I lost only one pawn, meaning that I still have 4 pawns on the queen side. On the king side, sorry, my opponent has 3 pawns on his king side, but this potentially could prove to be a big and decisive advantage, meaning that having 3 pawns on the queen side against 1 pawn, that's definitely something black could capitalize on. So that's the continuation offered by the engine. Not to castle straight away. Sometimes in chess it's important not to play passively. If white played, let's say, knight to g5, bishop to g4, and now all sorts of ideas become possible. One could put additional pressure on e2 pawn, then h3, bishop f5, and these are all very not the only moves. Rook would have gone to d5, bishop c8, knight e4, bishop e7, castle short, and bishop to b4. I mean, white can still hold this, but at this point engine gives +1 to black, 1.01. So meaning that this, I mean, even from human perspective, this position is far more pleasant for black. So, but in the game, after I played b3, after this awkward move, my opponent didn't take advantage. My opponent played queen c8. So yeah, in the game I played, let's have a look. I played b3. My opponent played queen to c8. Well, his intention was clear. He wanted to destroy this fianchetto structure that I had, meaning that he wanted to exchange my light square bishop. It was very clear that I'm going to be castling short, because there is absolutely no way I'm going queenside, since these pawns are advanced far, and then at some point the game would have opened up and the dark square bishop would be putting a pressure on my a3 pawn. So my opponent decided to play queen c8. In the game I played a calm developing move. Then it was followed by rook e8. I castled short, and then my opponent managed to exchange. Well, I mean, in a sense, he did follow his plan, and it's better to have a bad plan than to have no plan. To have no plan. I decided not to capture this light square bishop, because I mean, I don't want to see my opponent's queen being this close to my king, and then all sorts of idea could turn into reality. So I simply decided to develop something here, something on my own. I played bishop b5. Actually, I'm curious what Engine thinks about this move. Well, Engine considers this to be inaccuracy. Engine thinks that putting queen on c2 would have been a better option. Bishop takes. I took the bishop, and then my opponent played h6. So we had this very calm and waiting game. He played knight to h5. I mean, normally, I mean, it's okay. I mean, his intentions are clear. He wants to catch my dark square bishop. I decided to retreat. I know that normally it's never a good idea to put a bishop, let's say, in front of one's pawn, but I saw some grandmasters do that, so I figured I might as well follow their example. My opponent played bishop f6, putting pressure on my knight and x-raying my rook. I decided to play rook c1 straight away, although the computer thinks that bishop to d2 would have been a better option, still defending the rook, but I didn't like this x-ray from the dark square bishop against my rook. And then there was the first decisive mistake. My opponent played, well, not that decisive, but still, my opponent put his queen on g4. I played, I decided to centralize my knight. At that point, I was simply trying to exchange my knight for his bishop. So I like the idea of having a bishop against the knight in the endgame, because in the endgame it's always slightly better to have the bishop, well, if the position is opened enough. And then there was another imprecision. Well, this move was actually okay, because my opponent was defending the c7, and he was almost okay with the idea of giving up the bishop, meaning that he didn't play bishop to d8, but that would have been a very passive move. So my opponent played bishop to rook to c8. Sorry, I decided to double check the intentions of his queen. I wanted that queen to go away, and normally we say that having a bishop is always slightly favorable than having a knight, but for some reason I liked it. I liked my knight in the center, and I thought, okay, I've got a knight. It is a monster knight. It controls a number of key squares, and I didn't want to give up my knight for the sake of giving up my knight. And that bishop is kind of staring into nowhere. And even at this point, the engine gives plus 84. I mean 0.84 for white. So at this point, I didn't want to give up my knight, and I liked the fact that my knight was centralized. I decided to chase the queen away. He played queen to g6. I wanted to expand on the king side, and the engine absolutely loves that. I saw that the knight has nowhere to go, meaning that, I mean, you cannot capture your own pawn, and that bishop was kind of staying there very awkward. So I really didn't, and that's also the reason I didn't want to take the bishop, because when the opponent's knight is on the edge of the board, I think it's slightly better for me, because the knight becomes a monster piece if the knight is centralized. And I like the fact that my opponent's knight was on the edge of the board, so that's why I didn't want to give him, a free move, which would also improve the position of his pieces. So after this, I decided to attack the knight. Of course, my king is pinned, so meaning that I cannot capture it straight away. But as of this move, the knight has nowhere to go. He played bishop to b7. I mean, trying to create some sort of attack. I decided to play rook to b1. Of course, his queen kind of stares. His queen was looking at my rook, but my rook was defended. In fact, it was defended twice, so I had no issues with that. He grabbed the pawn, and at this point, oh yeah, that's what I played. I placed my knight on h4, attacking the rook. I didn't want attacking the queen. Sorry, I didn't want the queen to be x-raying my king. So that's the way I got rid of the pin, and his rook was forced to go. And here I played a Tempi move. I played f3, and notice there are two threats. This pawn is attacking his queen, and this pawn is attacking his knight. So at this point, it was so important not to play passively, and it was such a great thing that I put my knight a while back on this d5 square, and from that square, that knight was defending my bishop. Because once I played f3, imagine if this knight was somewhere else. I don't know, wherever. Imagine if this knight was, I don't know, let's put it onto some awkward square. Then my bishop would have been hanging. So I didn't realize it, and I think this should be a part of chess strategy. And it was so good that this knight managed to be there for so long, because there is no pawn to chase this knight away, and for some reason he decided to put his knight on the edge of the board. And yeah, so this was actually a great positioning, and I'm not at that level where I can think about those things consciously, but I admit I simply got lucky. So that's how I won a piece. Well, I'm not going to be going over all the moves, and the rest was, I mean, I was holding my positions, of course not in a super precise way. I did make some, imprecise moves once I played this. Well, actually, Engine likes the fact that I defended my knight, which was hanging with the bishop. At some point, I like the fact that I can kind of use this bishop as a bodyguard of my king, and if at some point this knight would be driven away from that key central square, that knight wouldn't have the responsibility of covering the bishop, which is on e3 square. So I did defend. I mean, he offered an exchange of bishops. So yeah, this was a very imprecise move. Engine says that this is the way to go. So yeah, instead of putting the knight on f4, well, actually, I wonder what would have been if he simply played g5. Oh no, that would have been a disaster. We can actually check the line, because I mean, technically this is the fork. Oh, okay. His rook would have been hanging. So see, I'm at the level where I miss a lot of stuff. So I really hope to go to 2000. But yeah, that's very embarrassing. Yeah, so I kind of attacked his queen with a Tempi. Queen gave me check, and then I placed my bishop on that g3 square. So basically my bishop is now functioning as a big pawn, so it's not it's not really a bishop. And at this point the engine gives me plus 2.77, which is, I mean, okay. Here, well, there was a series of not particularly precise moves. I mean, engine for some reason likes this move, e4. I wanted to stabilize things. I like the fact that this pawn was defended by this pawn, so meaning that even if he wanted to sack some material, it would have come at a very high price. So yeah, so this is not like super precise, and I decided to move this knight away to make sure that this bishop is not overloaded. By overloaded, I mean this bishop has, I mean, it's kind of overloaded already, because this bishop has the duty to defend the knight on h4, and this bishop also guards the king. So at least I wanted to turn this bishop into something that doesn't have too many functions. And yeah, I mean, the engine was okay with this move. Then he tries to chase my knight away, and this was a blunder according to the engine. Again, I played a natural move, and there was a series of blunders. I think I came again with one tempi move. It was important to attack his queen, and then, I mean, the rest was simply a technical stuff. I took with the knight. I'm attacking his queen again. I mean, he sacked the exchange. Oh, well, basically he gave up the queen. And then, well, at this point, I suppose my opponent was very nervous and maybe under time pressure. So that's why there was a series of very imprecise moves. And again, in this rating category, I mean, both players make mistakes, but it's okay. I mean, I hope to become better. But here, I played surprisingly a good move. I played queen to g6, and let's have a look at a few more moves. I mean, and the rest was just a series of blunders. Here, I knew that since I have such a big advantage, plus 12.5, and I've got an extra queen, I mean, that bishop is no longer functioning as a big pawn. That bishop is slightly better. I was very aware that it's always good to simplify things when you're winning. And I mean, I suppose at this point the guy was very disappointed. He wanted to kind of bluff his way into some complicated positions. I simply traded down, and I took his knight, and at this point the guy gave up. So yeah, I mean, I think this was one of the best games that I played on chess.com, and even though I ended up winning this game after not particularly being too good with the theory, I just wanted to show you these patterns. I mean, it seems that the b3 is the most natural move, but in this position it's so much better to play knight d5. So I hope this video was somewhat useful for players like me, for players who blunder a lot, for players who hang pieces. But yeah, let's see what we can do. Let's see how we can improve. And I hope you liked it, and we'll see you very soon. Take care, guys.